You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, happy Friday evening, folks. End of the week. Yes, it's here. This is Scotty Roberts. This is the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com for those of you not already there. And you can also come and watch the simulcast in video over on my YouTube stream. That's Mr. Scotty Roberts at youtube.com. youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Thanks for being here, folks. We're going to continue talking about our series about Gnosticism, ancient paganism, ancient Christianity, the formation of the church, things like this, not because this is a religious class or that we're preaching about anything, but because I think it's a vital part of our history, especially if we were raised in a Christianized setting, a Christian home, a Christian country, what we used to call a Christian country. And I think it's important to understand how Christianity began. I also think it's important to understand how much compatibility there is between Christianity and the ancient mysteries or the pagan mysteries. And so we're going to continue on with that program, with this topic through this program, and for days yet to come. And so I hope you're enjoying this. If you need to message me or want to talk to me about this stuff, you can do one of two things. You can join the chat room, the live chat room over at the YouTube stream, along with the other Intrepids, and discuss some things over there. You can email me at, it's my full name, ScottAllenRoberts.com. I'm sorry, that's my website, ScottAllenRoberts.com, A-L-A-N for Allen, ScottAllenRoberts.com, or email me at ScottAllenRoberts@gmail.com. So I can also give you another email. It's Scotty@ScottAllenRoberts.com. So it's real easy to get a hold of me. My phone number is on all my websites. I can give it out right here, 651-468-8115. I've had that same phone number for about 12 years, something like that. Back when I was the editor-in-chief of Taps Para magazine, the Ghost Hunters official magazine. I was the editor-in-chief, and that was the phone number where you could reach me anytime. That phone number's been published to the broad public ever since about 2009. So, and rare do I get a crank call. So don't make any crank calls. So I'll just hang up on you, or I'll tell you, or I'll engage you in conversation. So go ahead and get a hold of me if you've got any questions about the stuff we're doing. If you've got any things you want to hear differently. Right now I'm stuck on this topic because I think it's good for us to review things. History is fun. History is exciting, folks. So let's enjoy this. I'm not set up to take callers yet. I just don't have the software to do that yet. I could, but I don't yet. So one of these days we'll set that up and we'll take calls. And until then, message me or join the chat room over in the YouTube simulcast of this episode. Now let's move on. As you know, I am a tarot reader, and you can get hold of me. Go over to my website, ScottAllenRoberts.com. Click on the tarot link at the top, and you can purchase one of two. I've got a 5-card reading and a 10-card reading. And you can purchase those, and we'll put you on the schedule. Also, on Sunday mornings, unassociated with Odyssey Radio and the Odyssey Radio stream, or the radio show, I do It's Sunday on Sunday mornings. And we sometimes do, well, almost every show, we'll do 1 or 3 card readings for people that are stacked up in the chat room, and do them live on air. So you can come and enjoy that too. That's 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, 10 a.m. out east, 7 a.m., for the left coast. And you can come on and on Sunday mornings. Great way to get a cup of coffee, and we'll spend it live together over in the chat room. And that's it. That's all I got for you right now. So let's get into this. I want to talk about things where we left off yesterday. And we kind of left off, we were talking about all the stuff. We ended with the Acts of the Apostles. It was an adaptation of originally Gnostic texts. And all the different things around that. All the different scriptures that were put together in highlight that were showing that some of the original Gospels, the original texts of the New Testament, were things that were altered in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries in order to get across a more literalist view of what was going on. And there are earmarks for the textual criticisms. If you wanted, we could do a show on that, or several shows. I took a whole course in seminary on textual criticisms and how we would take problem passages in Scripture and go through and try to find out, either do an apologetic work on it or address the textual criticism. And there were lots of things that were edited in later years. So that's what yesterday was about. Today, we're moving on to the conflict between the literalists and the Gnostics. It came to a head under the pressure of the Roman persecution of Christianity, to which Gnostics and literalists reacted in very different ways. Now, you remember, you get pictures in your head of the Christians being dragged out into the Colosseum and being eaten by lions and things like that. And people watch this for fun. So let's look into some of this, what went on back then. For the literalists, Jesus had been a martyr. Therefore, to meet one's death was a sign of following gloriously in Jesus' footsteps. And so Cyprian, who died in 258, vividly describes the delight of the Lord with the sublime, the great, the acceptable spectacle of flowing blood, which quenches the flames and the fires of hell by its glorious gore. This is the way they saw that. If you're a Christian, you can extinguish the fires of hell by being executed or eaten by a lion or sent out in the gladiatorial games. So literalist martyrs were idealized as these spiritual athletes. They were holy warriors wearing the armor of God, in much the same way that Muslim extremists are today, when they strap on a bomb and they know they're going to their death for the sake of Allah. And there they will have, 72 virgins waiting for them. Well, what do women get when they do? They get 72 virgins as well? Male or female? I always wondered about that. I have never heard that addressed. So to be martyred in the early church was to be guaranteed a place in heaven. He went to his... What if you were a Jew or something, you didn't believe in Jesus and you're being dragged out into the Colosseum? Wait, I'm not a Christian. I don't need to be eaten by lions. Would he be guaranteed a place in heaven? So to be martyred was a one-way ticket. That's your escape from jail card, escape from hell card, was to be martyred. And this is the way the literalists saw it. And with such a prize of an offer, many literalist Christians actively sought their death. They believed that through suffering for 1 hour, they purchased for themselves eternal life. And that was a quote, actually, that was from The Testimony of Truth by Elaine Pagels. I believe it was Tertullian that said that. So Tertullian declares that he desired to suffer, that he may obtain from God complete forgiveness by giving in exchange his blood. Now let me ask you, what kind of God requires you to suffer to gain the free gift of eternal life that the Scripture says he gives? It's free for all of you to take, but if you suffer, you get a little bit more, you know what I mean? Shed your blood for me, and, we'll put you up a couple of notches. What the hell is that all about? Seriously, folks, when you think about that and think about the message of Jesus, the real Jesus, did he teach that you must suffer in order to attain God's favor? Now, look, the way I saw it theologically was that if Jesus came offering salvation, a free gift from God, and there was nothing you could do to earn it because you were sin nature. You had nothing good that you could do to earn the favor of God, so says the Scripture. It's all about the atoning death of Jesus on the cross and his resurrection. So, if Jesus was offering that and he died to give it to you for free, all you had to do was believe. Why then were some Christians telling us we could earn it by doing something on our own, by sacrificing ourselves and so on? Is that what earns eternal salvation according to Jesus? No. And so if you could do that, if you could earn eternal salvation on your own by your own works and the things that you did, then Jesus didn't have to die on the cross according to the theology and according to the literalist view of Old Testament prophecy. He wouldn't have had to die if you can do it yourself. So that was one thing that we ran into theologically with all of this stuff. Now, and by the way, when I was a teenager and in college, and I was starting to get in my ministry days, and I was learning all this stuff, we were like, I remember some guys coming in during breakfast or something at college, and they would say, "I was persecuted yesterday. Somebody spit in my face for preaching the gospel on the corner." And they wore it like a badge of honor. And that same thing hangs over to today, from way back in the early centuries. So in many ways, these fanatics gather together in small groups in the fringes of society, resemble most modern religious cults, which also offer their adherents heavenly rewards for willingly seeking out death through mass suicide. And although it's notable that somehow Tertullian and Irenaeus, two of the most vocal enthusiasts for glorious martyrdom, themselves managed to avoid this apparently desirable fate. They didn't get persecuted, but they told everybody else, if you got persecuted, it's cool. And so the Gnostics, by contrast, viewed the idea that martyrdom ensures salvation as a complete misunderstanding of Christianity. They believed that one should accept one's God-given fate, including meeting a martyr's death, but they regarded it as ridiculous and deluded to actively seek out martyrdom as a quick way to heaven. Spiritual enlightenment was to be found through the mystical realization of gnosis, of knowledge, the deeper knowledge, not by grand gestures of whatever you might bring to the table. And so, once again, the idea of sacrificing oneself for God. God doesn't need your sacrifice. And in theological terms, he didn't need your sacrifice. He needed your faith. Boom. That was the biggest sacrifice right there, because there was no proof for what you had to put your faith in. Moving on, a Gnostic text called The Testimony of Truth declares that those who are enthusiastic to be martyrs are the foolish who simply say the words, "We are Christians," yet who do not know who Christ is. They are empty martyrs, since they bear witness only to themselves. And so theirs will be only a human death, and will not lead to the salvation which they expect, for these matters are not settled in this way, and they do not have the word which gives life. All who teach that God desires human sacrifice are making God into a cannibal. This was the words of the Gnostics. These literalist Christians are the ones who oppress their brothers to the executioner under the illusion, and they encourage naive fellow Christians to go to the executioner, under the illusion that if they hold fast to the name of a dead man, they will become pure. And the author of the Apocalypse of Peter is particularly horrified at literalist exclamations over their joy over acts of violence done to the little ones. Clement of Alexandria writes of those who court martyrdom more sympathetically as children who have not yet become men in love with God, as the gnosis is, the Gnostic is. And he explains it this way. He says, no one then who is irrationally brave is a Gnostic. Since one might call children brave who through ignorance of what is to be dreaded undergo things that are frightful, so they touch fire even. And the wild beasts that rush close on points of spears, having a brute courage, might be called valiant. And such people who might perhaps call jugglers valiant, who tumble on swords with a certain dexterity, practicing a mischievous art for sorry gain. But he who is truly brave, with the peril arising from the bad feeling of the multitudes before his eyes, courageously awaits whatever comes. In this way, he's distinguished from others that are called martyrs, inasmuch as some furnish occasions for themselves, and rush into the heart of dangers. For some suffer from love of glory, and others from fear, or some other sharper punishment, and others for the sake of pleasures and the delights after death, being children in faith, blessed indeed, but not yet become men in love with God, as the Gnostic is. For there are, as is in the gymnastic contests, so also in church, crowns for men and children. And that was something that was written by Clement of Alexandria. And so the Gnostics did not believe that Jesus literally died as a martyr, but that his death symbolically, was representative of a profound mystical truth. To imitate Jesus wasn't to go to court martyrdom, but to die to one's own lower self and resurrect as the Christ within. It was an internal gnosis that you went through, the gaining of knowledge and the expressing of knowledge. It wasn't going out and sacrificing yourself on the fires and the torments of persecutors. So to the literalists, such Gnostic attitudes made the sufferings of the martyrs appear to be futile. The author of a letter attributed to Ignatius writes indignantly, "But if, as some say, Jesus' suffering was only an appearance, then why am I a prisoner, and why do I long to fight with the wild beasts? In that case, I am dying in vain." That's what Ignatius said. Literalists saw Gnostics as traitors, who were undermining their attempts to unite the church in the face of oppression by offering a theological justification of cowardice. Gnostics, on the other hand, saw literalists as fanatical extremists, leading with the gullible to pointless suffering with false promises. And I think we experienced some of that in a more watered-down way all the way up into the 20th century. Back when I was in the Baptist church, there were, being persecuted for the faith was a good thing. If a man slaps you, turn the other cheek. That was such a misquoted passage. And so let's look at the Romans and their persecutions. The traditional history of the persecution of Christianity paints the Roman Empire as having some particular hatred of this new religion, but this was not so. Rome was constantly purging itself of mystics, philosophers, and religious cults, which it saw as a threat to its stability. The Romans had a love-hate relationship with the mysteries of the Gnostics, of which the Christian cult was just another example. They were attracted to the exotic spirituality and profound philosophy of these foreign cults, yet also terrified by the radical challenge they presented to Roman political authority. And so the followers of the mysteries of Dionysus, for example, like the later followers of the mysteries of Jesus, were accused of conspiracy to overthrow the state. And from as early as 186 BCE, the mysteries of Dionysus had been prohibited in Rome, and the shrines destroyed throughout Italy. Huge numbers of initiates were executed, sometimes many thousands at a time. This starts to paint, as you can see, a very different picture of what was going on with these persecutions. At various times during the first few centuries, it was, in effect, a crime to philosophize in Rome. Even the great Stoic philosopher Epictetus, Epictetus, if that's how it's pronounced, was exiled. Even the great Stoic philosopher Epictetus was exiled, along with countless others. And like Christian martyrs of the day and those who came after them, many philosophers were sent to their death for refusing to compromise with the tyrannical Roman authorities. And so it was a political thing. And so a text called The Acts of the Pagan Martyrs glorifies the courage and the integrity of those who were persecuted initiates. And the philosophers are recorded as having gone to the stake, laughing at the sudden collapse of human destinies, and dying unmoving in the flames. I'd find that a hard thing to do. Even if I knew I was being persecuted and put to death for my faith and my stance on something, that I was sacrificing myself, I still wouldn't want to be burned to death. So, no, or I wouldn't want to be ripped apart by lions either. So, I think I'd rather go in a gladiatorial game. At least I'd have a fighting chance. So, according to the traditional history of Christianity, from the earliest of times, large numbers of Christians were horribly persecuted by the Romans. In fact, until the middle of the 3rd century, there was no legalized persecution of Christians. Previous persecutions had been against individuals only, or limited to a particular city. Christians weren't seen as a part of the threat, and therefore they weren't particularly oppressed. In the 2nd century, the Emperor Trajan wrote to one of his governors that Christians must be given a proper trial, and that judges must not give weight to anonymous attacks. Christians were not to be hunted out in the Roman Empire, and accusers had to pay the costs of any prosecution, especially if they lost the prosecution. So, in 250 of the Common Era, now, by the way, wouldn't that be interesting if all accusers had to pay the expense and be fined for making a false accusation that could not be proved in court? I think of the Me Too movement. That comes to mind. I think of Kavanaugh, Judge Kavanaugh, and those ridiculous here. I think of all the stuff against the current president. Maybe there should be consequences for bringing false accusation or accusations that can't be proven. Let's move on. That's how it was in Rome for the Christians. So in 250 of the Common Era, AD, plague swept the ancient world, decimating whole populations. The empire was on the verge of collapse, and the Christian cult found itself being scapegoated for Roman misfortunes. Now, the Emperor Decius ordered Christians to offer animal sacrifices to the gods for the health and well-being of the empire, and instigated the first general persecution against those who refused to give sacrifice to the gods. It lasted only a year, but it was repeated under Valerian in the 250s, and again under Diocletian in the early 300s. In the whole of its history, therefore, Christianity was officially persecuted for a total of 5 years in Rome. And then it was for not doing certain things the government said to do. I'm a Christian. I can't offer an animal sacrifice to your gods. Poof, gone. Persecuted. So the scale of these great persecutions, you know what? We're running overtime, so I'm going to pick that thought up when I come back, about the scale and the great persecution. Folks, sit tight. I'm going to be back in about 2 minutes because we're out of time in this segment. Sit tight. All right, folks, thanks for waiting it out through the break. Thanks for being here. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program, segment 2, on Friday night. It's finally Friday, the end of the week. I hope you have a good weekend planned. I hope you don't have to work through the weekend. So welcome to the show as your introduction to the weekend. And you can also come over and join the chat room over on the simulcast of this program in video over on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And folks, you know what I bring to the table? I bring to the table 40 years of research. And I went to Bible college, I went to seminary. I'm degreeless in both of those because I dropped out and went into advertising. But I also worked as a youth pastor and was in ministry alongside my career in advertising for many years. And I've researched for all of those years, written a few books, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. I've written The Secret History of the Reptilians. I co-authored with John Ward. I wrote The Exodus Reality. And so those 3 books are all my non-fictional books that are on these topics. And have always studied and researched the stuff we've been talking about for weeks now, off and on, all throughout my adult life. And so now, let's get back into this. That's what I bring to the table. Let's get back into this. We were talking about the persecutions. And so the scale of the great persecutions, even the so-called Great Persecution under Diocletian, is now known to have been widely exaggerated, all by Christian propagandists. And writing in the middle of the 3rd century, Origen tells us that the few Christians who had died for their faith were pretty easily numbered. It's almost like he's saying you can count them on 1 or 2 hands. And under the persecution of Decius in the huge city of Alexandria, Egypt, only 10 men and 7 women suffered for being Christian. That's 17 people. Roman governors actually often showed no desire to deliberately harm the Christians, who refused to participate in the compulsory rituals of the empire, where they were offered as a compromise. And if they refused to eat sacrificial meat, might they not offer incense? One governor pleads with a would-be martyr, a Christian going to his death for not making the offering. He said this, a Roman governor, "Do you want to wait a few days to think it over? Don't you see the beauty of this pleasant weather? No pleasure will come your way if you kill yourself." And so he's offering them even to burn incense to the other gods. You know what, folks? Even when I was a dyed-in-the-wool, very fundamentalist, conservative Baptist Christian, there were times where I was asked this question. It was a hypothetical. Well, what would you do if you were faced with profess Christ or reject Christ or be killed? And I said, you know what? I said, God knows my heart. I said, should I reject Christ and be killed on the spot? Or should I reject him ritually and live to preach another day, to escape from that hardship, from under that? You know what? I find it no problem at all. If somebody's going to want to kill me or my family, I would save me and my family. And we'd find a way to get out. Now, of course, you're talking ancient times, so things were different back then. You could certainly walk out of a city with your belongings on your back and end up somewhere else and fade into obscurity. It'd be a lot different nowadays. So what would you do if somebody put a gun to your head or said, I'm going to throw you to that huge python down there in the pit who's been starved for 6 months? We're going to throw you down there. He's going to eat you whole, and you're going to sit there and digest for several days before you die. Or you can burn incense to this God you don't believe in. Hey, I'd be saying, where's the matches? So that's not because I'm weak of spirit. It's because I'm strong of spirit. My faith, whatever it is, can withstand what I might have to do to save my family. It's on a spiritual level. Well, that's just a hypothetical question for you. So Ironically, it was the Christians themselves who often courted martyrdom. And one group of Christians approached the governor of Asia, begged him to put them to death, but he refused, telling them that they were free to use cliffs and ropes if they wanted to die so much. So like the Gnostics, the emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius saw such volunteering for martyrdom as empty posturing, rather than an example of enlightened acceptance of fate. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Readiness to die must come from a man's own judgment, not from a mere obstinacy, as with the Christians. It must come considerately, and in such a way as to persuade others that death is not horrible, not with tragic displays of martyrdom." So some Roman emperors were actually sympathetic towards Christianity, regarding it as yet another interesting and exotic mystery religion. Alexander Severus in 230 AD was even said to have had a statue of Christ in his private chapel alongside those of other god-men of the pagan mysteries. His mother was a patron of the Christian philosopher Origen, as well as the famous pagan philosophers. So it wasn't as widespread as we've heard, as the old movie epics in the 50s and the 60s showed that Christians were always under the persecution of Rome. It's true there were a few Roman emperors that persecuted them, but they also gave them ways out, saying, you don't have to die for this, you know. We don't believe what you're teaching, so, sacrifice an animal or light incense to our gods, and you'll be okay. But the Christians refused that. So I think God could probably find a way, well, not the God I suppose we've come to learn and know in the Old Testament, but would God allow his people, would he condemn his people or pass judgment on his people for saying, hey, I had to burn some incense to a false god in order to save my family? It's a question to ask. Now let's look at the growth of Christianity. Despite the traditional claims, there's no evidence at all that the Roman persecutions led to a significant increase in the number of Christians. Christianity didn't really take off until the Emperor Constantine adopted the religion himself, at which point martyrdom was no longer an option, as Christians were a favored and protected group, because they became the official religion of the Roman Empire under Emperor Constantine. And that was in the early 300s. And Christianity is usually pictured as spreading rapidly like wildfire, especially amongst the poor and the dispossessed, until it was the dominant force in the ancient world, waiting to take its destined place as the religion of the Roman Empire. But this is a complete fantasy. That's not how that happened. First cultivated by Tertullian around 200, who makes the outrageous claim that, quote, nearly all the Christians in nearly all the citizens in nearly all the cities are Christians. And scholars now recognize that this is a ridiculous exaggeration on the part of Tertullian. The more trustworthy Origen, about 40 years later, admits that Christians were actually only a tiny fraction of the ancient world's inhabitants. And so the question of how many Christians there were in that first few centuries is really difficult to answer and to pinpoint. Inscriptions and pagan texts make next to no references to Christians before the year 250 AD. They're not mentioned either of the two most substantial histories written in the early 3rd century. We have really only one actual statistic, and that was from the 4th century Christian historian Eusebius, who was an extremely unreliable source. He was the apologist of Constantine, who was making Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. He tells us that in 251, more than 1,500 widows and poor people were supported by Rome's Christians, who included 154 ministers of varying rank, 52 of whom were exorcists, he said. Scholars estimate that by the year 250, about 2% of the empire's population was Christian. Now, after this time, it may have risen to around 4 to 5% of the population. But even in the 4th century, Eusebius still knows of only 3 little townships which are Christian in the entire Holy Land. And so the growth in the popularity of Christianity in the first 3 centuries was not unique, but part of a general upsurge in the popularity of the mysteries throughout the whole ancient world. And as it entered the new millennium, religious skepticism was rife within the Roman Empire. Gibbon, historian, remarks, all gods were seen by philosophers as equally true, by the politicians as equally false, and by the magistrates as equally useful. But Plutarch tells us that the oracles that had been in decline during his youth were flourishing again at the beginning of the 2nd century. During this century in Athens, the ceremonies of Dionysus, which had lapsed completely, were reinstated, and the number of people seeking initiation at Eleusis grew considerably, and the mysteries of Mithras also became hugely popular across the whole of the empire, almost more popular than the spread of Christianity in those first 3 centuries. So now there were also pagan reactions to Christianity. Christianity was just another mystery cult, gaining ground alongside many other mystery cults. And it was attracting, however, the attention of pagan intellectuals. Their reactions to this new religion were similar to those of mainstream society, to the many fringe religious cults of today. When Christianity became too popular to simply be ignored, its claims to originality were justifiably derided, and its leaders accused of manipulating the gullible to line their own pockets and bolster their own egos. Think there was none of that in the early spread of Christianity? Tacitus and Pliny, right around the early 100s AD, the first pagan writers to take any notice of Christianity, saw the Christians as just superstitious fanatics, given to over-emotional enthusiasm. Celsius described them as a people who have cut themselves off from the rest of civilization by claiming their faith to be unique and in opposition to ancient paganism. In his view, Christians were irrational, for they do not want to give or receive a reason for what they believe, but they rather win converts by telling them not to ask questions, but to have faith. That was taking place. We say that now. I've said that now. I've said, we don't ask questions, but we take it by faith. They were saying that, guess what, 2,000 years ago. So Celsius wrote, taking its root in the lower classes, the religion continues to spread amongst the vulgar. Nay, one can even say it spreads because of its vulgarity and the illiteracy of its adherents. And while there are a few moderate, reasonable, and intelligent people who are inclined to interpret its beliefs allegorically, yet it thrives in its purer form among the ignorant. That's what Celsius said. Now, his friend, the satirist Lucian, lampooned Christianity way back, we're talking 900 years ago. 1900 years ago. He lampooned Christianity as just a confidence scam aimed at making money from the gullible. And he said this, he said, if a professional sharper who knows how to capitalize on a situation gets among these Christians, he makes himself a millionaire overnight, laughing up his sleeve at the simpletons. That's an interesting quote, isn't it? That's from Lucian, from his Peregrinus Proteus. And the Christian philosopher Origen, writing in the middle of the 3rd century, is equally uncomplimentary toward the Christian community, describing it as made up of men concerned about how to make money and women gossiping so loudly nothing could be heard, with an exclamation point. Origen sadly acknowledges that as Christianity became an established religion, so it became corrupt. Go figure. He said this: I admit that at the present time, perhaps, when on account of the multitude of people coming to the faith, even rich men and persons in positions of honor, and ladies of refinement and high birth, favorably regard adherents of the faith, one might venture to say that some become leaders of the Christian teaching for the sake of a little prestige. Now, in the middle of the third, mind you, this isn't 2,000 years after its foundation. This is within 150 years of the life of Christ, the life and death of Christ. And so in the middle of the 3rd century, a wealthy woman called Lucilla actually paid to have her servant Majorinus made Bishop of Carthage. She paid to have her servant become the Bishop of Carthage. Paul of Samosata, Bishop of Antioch in 260 A.D., is reported to have found the service of the church a very lucrative profession. He extorted frequent contributions from the rich amongst his flock, a large part of which he pocketed for himself to pay for his luxurious lifestyle. In 270, the pagan philosopher, I got to see how to pronounce his name here, Porphyry, Porphyry, Porphyry. He wrote the most devastating critique of Christianity in 15 volumes. He demonstrated that the Christian Gospels were full of inconsistencies, exaggerations, impossibilities, and falsehoods, and he could not be inspired by a true God. He derided the belief in the physical resurrection as materialistic and absurd. Now, that's just an opinion, but that's what he did. He regarded it as ignorant and vulgar for anyone to assert that the great and beautiful cosmos would perish in an apocalypse, whilst his own insignificant physical body would be preserved by God for all eternity. For Porphyry, promising any criminal that he would be absolved and enter paradise so long as he was baptized before he died, undermined the very foundations of an organized society of decent human beings. Now, by the way, I would disagree with that. I think, to a point. I think that there are people who have committed heinous crimes in their life and are converted and have a true faith. Look at the Apostle Paul himself. He was there at the stoning of Stephen. He was going to Damascus before his conversion with letters of writs of execution for the Christians in Damascus. He killed people in the name of wiping out this Christian sect. So his story goes. Yet he was converted and became the Apostle Paul. So, this guy, we're talking about some of these writings. I'm sorry. Let me get his name. Porphyry. So Porphyry included in his books an oracle of Apollo, which praised Christ, but asserted that the Christian cult was absurd. Praised Christ, but the followers were nuts, is what he was saying, because God incarnate was a myth. Not surprisingly, when the Roman Empire became Christian, Porphyry's words were promptly banned and consigned to the flames, and his writings were burned. And so, enter the Roman Catholic Church. This is one of the great ironies of history, that the mighty Roman Empire eventually came to embrace Christianity. Not only as another mystery cult of the pagans, but as the one and only true religion. It seems that, incredible as it seems, that having completely laid waste the state of Israel, Rome should end up adopting a religion with Jewish history as its sacred texts, based around a Jewish prophet said to have been executed by a Roman governor. How could this possibly have happened? The traditional history, of course, suggests that it could only have been the hand of God guiding humanity away from the darkness of paganism, leaving aside the possibility that Christianity is God's religion of preference. However, there are other reasons for its success. Christianity was not only foreign and a mystery cult adopted by the Roman Empire, but in 304, just 17 years before Christianity became the state religion, another God-man who was miraculously born on, again, 25th of December, and whose devotees also celebrated a symbolic meal of bread and wine, was declared the protector of the empire, the Persian savior Mithras. The Persians were the main rivals and ancient enemies of the Romans. So the Romans' adoption of Mithras is actually even more shocking than their adoption of the Jewish savior, Jesus. And the mysteries of Mithras spread extremely rapidly throughout the Roman Empire in the 1st century. And at the heights of its popularity in the 3rd century, Mithraism was practiced from one end of the empire to the other. As one modern authority put it, from the banks of the Black Sea to the mountains of Scotland and to the borders of the Great Sahara Desert. Mithraic monuments often tell us that slaves, as well as freemen, were initiates of the mysteries, and that often it was the former who achieved the highest ranks. And in Mithraism, the last indeed became first. And at the end of the 2nd century, Emperor Commodus, and you remember him from the movie Gladiator, portrayed by Joaquin Phoenix. This is the emperor we're talking about. Commodus himself was initiated into the mysteries of Mithras, which created an immense stir in the Roman world and led to a great swell in the cult's popularity. Now, a number of emperors after Commodus attempted to make Mithraism the religion of empire also became followers of Mithras. Other Roman leaders had flirted to different degrees with different mystery religions. Mark Antony had styled himself on Dionysus. Claudius had looked to Attis. Vespasian had worshipped Serapis. Domitian honored Osiris. Elagabalus tried to enforce the monotheistic cult of Helios. To endorse their claim of one emperor, one empire, in the face of increasing fragmentation, the Roman empires needed one faith, a universal or Catholic religion. All these cults were proposed at different times, but without success. In the first half of the 4th century, Emperor Constantine tried Christianity. It was an ideal candidate for the role. The Romans needed a mystery religion because they were always popular with the people. But the mystery religions were led by mystics and philosophers who had the audacity to question and undermine the authority of the state. Literalist Christianity, however, was a mystery religion that had purged itself of all its troublesome intellectuals. It was already an authoritarian religion. Now we're talking about the more orthodox side. It was already an authoritarian religion which encouraged the faithful to have blind faith in those holding positions of power. It was exactly what the Roman authorities wanted, a religion without mystics, the outer mysteries without the inner mysteries, form without content. So in 321, Constantine became the first Christian emperor of Rome. And although his motivation was clearly political, not spiritual, many years after the event, he claimed that his conversion had come about through a holy vision. On the eve of battle, he and all the troops had seen a sign of the cross in the noonday sky, inscribed with the words, "By this conquer," the cross. And this was not the familiar Christian cross, however, but the pagan Chi-Rho symbol. Having gone to bed wondering what the sign in the sky had meant, Constantine had been visited in his dreams by none other than Jesus Christ himself, who was bearing the same symbol and who commanded him to use its likeness in his engagements with the enemy. Constantine emblazoned the emblem on his troops' shields, won the battle as promised, and became a Christian. And if he's to be believed, it would seem that Jesus, the Prince of Peace, won over the most terrible empire of the ancient world by offering its emperor a magic military talisman. How about that? Man. And by the way, the Chi-Rho monogram originated in pagan papyri, where scholars used it as a sign to mark prophetic passages with the Chi-Rho, standing for the Greek chestron, meaning auspicious. And with Constantine's conversion to Christianity, the Chi-Rho became interpreted as an abbreviation for Christ. So this symbol, therefore, had a double meaning, one for pagans, one for Christians, which suited Constantine's purposes perfectly. And there's so much more on Constantine, but we're out of time. We'll pick up Constantine tomorrow. I think it'll be fun to look into him a little bit historically and what he did, what his mom did. If you don't know it, she was really the first biblical archaeologist to exist. Constantine's mom in the early 300s. So we'll look at that tomorrow, folks. Thanks for being here. Well, it actually will be Monday. We'll see you on Sunday for It's Sunday, our live broadcast. And you have a good weekend otherwise. Thanks for being here.